We also have Terry Matson. Terry is the newest edition of Code Pink. With a focus on Venezuela, she led a multinational anti-sanctions campaign delegation to Venezuela in March and actually came back from a 3-month stay, and we'll be talking a little bit more about her experience in Venezuela. Welcome, Terry.
There's a couple things I want to comment on that Anya and Ben both said before I talk a little bit about my personal experience in Venezuela. Earlier this year, I was there for 3 months after leading an anti-sanctions delegation. The first thing is, Ben, you mentioned ALBA and the whole threading the needle, the creation of ALBA, and I think it's really important this week to understand the United States' hatred for ALBA. June 28th marks the 10th anniversary of the coup in Honduras, and Honduras was on the verge of joining ALBA prior to Zelaya being removed from office. And so I think we can all understand how strong the United States feels about that particular organization. And so I just want to honor that fact that June 28th is the 10th anniversary. And also we've done a lot of talking. And also, we've done a lot of talking tonight about transfer of wealth, concentration of wealth, natural resource grabbing. And the last time I was here, and Ambassador Moncada, you were as well, was during opening week of the UNGA 2018. And one of the major themes in the opening speeches that week that we heard throughout, through many countries, large and small, was a real dialogue between, not dialogue, that's the wrong way to put it, controversy, I guess is better. Those countries that clearly believe in multilateralism, large and small, and those countries, principally the United States, Honduras, and Ukraine, that believe in unilateralism. And I would argue one of the biggest issues, ideas, economic theories that Chavez did promote in expanding economic freedom throughout Latin America was this promotion of multilateralism. And I do think that's one of the largest factors that the U.S. disagrees with Venezuela and others in the region, in the hemisphere. So that's just my brief comments on those two issues that came up. I also think one of, regarding sanctions specifically and us as U.S. citizens, we basically are victims of a 20-year U.S. media coup against Venezuela. And we as a population have been really treated with a very specific narrative against Venezuela. It's been going on for 20 years and it's really hard to crack. And Anya, you and your compatriots in journalism have a tough job at that. But we are conditioned to thinking that warfare, and Ben, you touched on this too, that warfare is equivalent to boots on the ground or the U.S. dropping bombs. Of course, we're not doing any of that yet in Venezuela. Sanctions are equally as crippling, if not more so, and again, we'll refer to the CEPR report that Mark and Jeffrey produced. And so that's what I would like to talk to you about, is what it is like to live day to day in Venezuela, and some of my personal experiences. I have two things that I'm involved in at this point. Clearly, you can see I'm with Code Pink, and I'm very proud to say that I'm a recent activist. As of a week now, I've been active with them in a less formal role, but now in a quite formal role, living in Washington, D.C. now. So one of the things that I've been doing is taking delegations to Venezuela over the last 10 years. I think it's really important for U.S. citizens specifically, and I would now argue Canadians as well, and other nations, but North America specifically, to go and see on the ground what it's like in Venezuela, and not only to experience Venezuela, but to bring that experience back to North America. Because there is a huge media narrative that needs to be broken, and that can be done through events like this. So I took a group of 14 people to Venezuela in March, right after the national blackout. And we were there to study the sanctions, and we lived through several days without electricity, without running water. We spent the majority of our time in Caracas, but we did go west to Lara State and spent some time in Barquisimeto, which is the 4th largest city in Venezuela. And I will tell you, universally, unanimously, all 14 of us responded immediately to the energy on the ground in Venezuela. People are still friendly, people still speak with you, people will help you do pretty much anything. And that is so antithetical to what we're hearing here. And I really cannot stress enough the resilience of the Venezuelan people right now, all of you. It's really, it makes me very teary-eyed. I mean, it's profound. And I think that it needs to be said, and I would encourage all of you to go and experience it. Despite everything that has been thrown at this nation and its people, the people still smile, they still talk to one another on the streets, they still get in line for the bus and go to work every day. They get their kids up in the morning, feed them breakfast, get them clothed, and send them to school. There is quite a normal life in Venezuela day to day. It is not easy to navigate a normal day as we would define it here in the States, but people are doing it, and it is a profound thing to witness. So after our delegation, I chose to stay, and I lived in Caracas in a politically mixed working class neighborhood. And I really want to stress the politically mixed demographic I was living among. Most of us tend to think wealthy people, anti-Chavistas, opposition folks are on the east side of the city, and all the Chavistas are on the west side of the city. I was living among working class opposition people, predominantly. The household I was in is definitively Chavista, and I was there by choice. But it was very fascinating to live among opposition people. But mind you, these were working class opposition people who had absolutely nothing in common with stand-up President Guaido, and they were quite overt in conversation that they would never vote for him because they do not have anything in common with him or that 1% of wealthy capitalists that he represents. So I wanted to just share, and then we maybe can go to Q&A, so that two specific experiences that I had. The household I lived in, I did not pay rent. My deal, so to speak, with the family I was living with was for me to buy the groceries. And I could do this with US dollars, whereas they could not. And let me just say a little something about US dollars, and Samuel, you can correct me. But I was in Venezuela twice last year, March and then May. And what I saw last year compared to this, or this year compared to last, was I was able to use small currency, 1s and 5s, on the street, in restaurants, in stores, readily. There was no question about whether they could be, used to purchase. And I would argue that that's a very insidious form of dollarizing the economy. The U.S., to a certain level, has succeeded with the sanctions, with creating hyperinflation, in forcing this insidious dribble of U.S. dollars into the economy. And so this did lead to me buying the groceries for the household. Semana Santa, I went grocery shopping in, there was very little open because it was, huge holiday season, and people in Venezuela do honor their holidays, and it's not like where I'm from originally in the Silicon Valley where you work 24/7 regardless of day or week or time of year. They actually have family and friends and celebrate holidays and celebrate their lives. So I ended up going grocery shopping in Colonia San Bernardino, and this was fairly upper middle class, again mixed politically. I found this, what was open on what's known as Holy Saturday, the Saturday right before Easter, was a lovely market in a mixed-use building. I would say mixed residential on the upper floors, and this beautiful market on the ground floor. This market was comparable to something you would see in Midtown Manhattan or say in the Marina District in San Francisco. It was small, but beautifully packed and organized with pretty much every food product you could imagine. So I went in with a friend of mine, and we went to the butcher section, and we picked out a fresh whole chicken. The fresh whole chicken was raised in Venezuela. And then we got 6 beef patties. The beef was from Venezuela. And then we also bought a frozen pork loin that was frozen, that was imported. We bought at the deli section, a beautiful deli counter, we bought a 1/4 pound of sliced ham for sandwiches. The ham was imported. We bought a 1/4 pound of sliced white cheese. The cheese was produced in Venezuela. I want you to clearly understand how much food is being produced in Venezuela. Not to the volume that we would all like to see, but there is more and more food products being produced domestically, and I think that's really important for all of you to know. We bought a flat of eggs. The flat of eggs was 15. The eggs were produced in Venezuela. The eggs, I have to say, when I arrived in mid-March, the drive from the airport into the center of Venezuela, I noticed a number of changes, improvements, things for the better that I had seen over last year. And one of the things was this presence of eggs. Now, we bought a flat of 15 on Holy Saturday on this grocery shopping run. But you see eggs now, and this again is a change over last year. Eggs are a predominant source of protein in stores and in street markets. And it's a more affordable form of protein, and it's readily available. It's still expensive, but it is far less expensive than some of the things that we were buying on this particular Saturday. And so what else did we buy? We bought a loaf of bread that was produced in Venezuela. We bought all our fresh vegetables and fruit. All our fresh produce was bought at the same grocery store. All was produced in Venezuela. We bought a liter of orange juice that was produced there. We bought a gallon of water, and we bought a lot of small snacks like galletas and chips, papas fritas, and all of those were produced in Venezuela. So that grocery list that I just read off to you and that we purchased was $36 US. Now, where I come from in San Francisco, it would probably be about $200, particularly including all the meat items we did. So you think, okay, that's what 36 US bought. But you have to keep in mind the household I was living in, $36 was 3.5 months' income. So my point in sharing this with you is that it's not that there is not a lack of food, goods, and even hygiene, personal hygiene products. It's the access, and the access is controlled by predominantly the private sector. 80% of the Venezuelan economy is still privately owned. And so you can see how these items are being used against the people. So no matter how much the government continues to raise wages, the private sector will continue to raise prices. So the government's good, intention of creating more buying power for people is terrific, but the private sector does not allow that. And so the sanctions are working from inside and outside of the country, in my observation. But still, I have to say, no matter what household you walk into, people will always offer you something to eat and drink. And I think that is a real statement and tribute to the Venezuelan people and their culture. There is always something to offer you. So that was our grocery shopping experience. And then I had an interesting phone conversation. I called home from the house I was living in. You should know there is Wi-Fi and cellular data in Venezuela. It does exist and is quite usable, and there did not appear to be any sort of government censorship in access to it and surfing the internet. But I called home on Mother's Day, and it was about 10 o'clock in the morning, and I was sitting out front of the house that I was living in, and had a good conversation with my mom, and all of a sudden she started hearing a lot of background noise in the phone conversation, a lot of laughter and some kids kicking around a soccer ball and chasing each other and doing normal kid things. And my mom stopped in the middle of the conversation and she said, "Well, what's that?" And I said, what do you mean, what's that? She said, "Well, all that noise in the background." And I said, "Well, kids playing. That's all the neighborhood kids playing." Now, I'm in a politically mixed neighborhood, and all the kids from all the different households were out in the middle of the street playing despite family politics. My mother was pleasantly surprised that there were so many kids out playing in the neighborhood, because what we are so conditioned to hearing in the United States is that Venezuela is on the verge of a civil war, that it's a war zone, that things are so horrible there. Here we had on Sunday kids out, and I would say every day after school because I lived there. But this particular Sunday it was quite, animated play, and so much so that my mother heard it, in the background on our phone conversation. And I just think that's just a really good example to share with you that there is normal life going on throughout most of the country, and it's such an antithetical thing to share back here in the States because of this 20-year media coup against the country. Thank you for mentioning the CLAB program, and that was a big part of the household food that we had access to when I was staying. It's a fantastic program, and it's helping people who would not otherwise have access to food. And again, I will come back to the private sector controlling the supply and demand and the price. And so for the government to just give people more money to buy food products does not work, because the prices are continually raised by the private sector. So to provide subsidized food is much, much more effective. So what I saw, at one point we got a box of food, and the majority of the products inside the box came from Mexico on ships. And while I was there, one of the things that happened with Venezuela was that its coastal waters became defined as a war zone by many marine freight insurance companies. And so that has affected which shipping lines now come in and out of Venezuela. Some have stopped sailing to Venezuela ports because they can no longer afford the wartime insurance coverage. And I do believe that has affected 8 of the 10 ships coming from Mexico. The other food that we got a bag at one point of food as well. a big plastic bag, and inside that bag, again, was all subsidized food products, and every product in that bag was produced in Venezuela, not Mexico, Venezuelan products. And so I saw two things in my neighborhood. My neighborhood, I will say, was predominantly opposition. Those people got food just as we in the Chavista household got. And the food was distributed through the community council. The community council was majority opposition, and some Chavista households. Everyone got food. Everybody participated on the weekly community council meetings. Everybody had a specific responsibility in the neighborhood, and they did it regardless of political affiliation.
And because special things happen on special days, we have a very special person here with us today. We have Samuel Moncada Costa, who is the ambassador to the UN.
Good evening. Thank you very much for attending this invitation to talk about Venezuela. I'm going to say a few words based on what I heard, which is very, very interesting and sparked a lot of new interesting ideas. Let me just, because I am a historian, I got this bias. Let's begin with this Klansman, really impressed me, Klansman, Woodrow Wilson. I didn't know that until a couple of years ago. I always thought of Woodrow Wilson as the man who made peace in Europe and proposed the peace plan and the Society of the Nation, self-determination, yes. And then I knew that the man here was was an admirer of the birth of the nation, this Ku Klux Klan film, and he was absolutely racist. I was impressed with the difference between Woodrow Wilson abroad and Woodrow Wilson in Europe, because Woodrow Wilson in the Caribbean, in Latin America, is what you said, the man who invaded Haiti. But he also hated the South and the African Americans. Interesting. Well, it's the same kind of schizophrenic or bipolar, different personalities that you find here in the history of the United States. I mean, you can find so pro-war people in the Democratic Party, and even I watch her in the evening, this lady that speaks at the MSNBC, Rachel Maddow, a progressive person here, anti-Trump, and then she was defending Bolton because he didn't attack, Trump didn't follow his advice to attack Venezuela. Bolton was proposing, we need to go in, and Trump was saying to the Washington Post, or whoever was leaking, no, let's think that again, and Rachel Maddow was saying Trump is a bad man because he didn't follow his own man, Bolton. It's incredible. So that she is the progressive person here. And then you saw on the other side, the guy from the Fox News who talked, then he's an incredible, that man I always thought, well, he still is a racist, anti-immigrant, all of it, and then he said, we don't need to go in Venezuela, we don't need to go in Iran. I spoke to the president, I advised him not to invade. You see, these kind of crazy things. I never expect them in my life to see that, but I am seeing that. And what I found, I knew that years ago, that there is no Democrats and Republicans. There are pro-war and anti-war people on both sides. It's very interesting, the war party. And even I saw one Republican representative from the north of Florida, I can't remember the exact district, and his district has some marine base or whatever, people who would invade Venezuela if they are ordered to, and he was speaking to Trump, please don't go into Venezuela because my people is going to suffer. It's interesting to see that. I wasn't expecting that as well. But my point is that, as it has been said here, sanctions are violent, and sanctions are a war by other means. And sanctions provoke suffering, and sanctions are the new kind of, there are so many names for it, hybrid, unconventional, low profile, kind of wars, but it's war. And they realize that they are provoking suffering, and they are trying to implode Venezuela and any country under sanctions from within. And then if they have the chance to go in military, they would go in military. And what I want to tell you is that there are not two extreme sanctions and war, or boots on the ground, as it's been said. There is a spectrum of choices. There is some kind of menu. And there is a continuum. They are not isolated from each other. There is a continuum. You can upgrade from one level of sanctions to another, and then from one level of sanctions to sabotage. For example, when we said on the 7th of March that we were suffering a cyber attack which provoked a blackout that we had never before in our history had, 7 days blackout nationally. And when we said that we were under a cyber attack, people laughed at us. And then you began to see things like there is a malware program taken from the NSA, that people in Baltimore are threatening the grid there, the power electricity companies, that they don't pay, if they don't pay some ransom, I don't know how much, they will produce a blackout in Baltimore because they got the software to do it. And they took the software from the NSA. It's a public news. I don't know if you have read it or not, but it's there in the news. I'm not making it up. And then you see that the United States says, the government states that they also have the cyber weapons, and they have even a cyber command prepared to do the same in Russia if it's necessary. So they have the weapons to do it. And then you see that something happened in Argentina. I can't explain what happened in Argentina, but something unusual never happened something like that in Argentina. Someone was practicing there. But my point is that now, is it more believable or not that we were under a cyber attack? The very same morning of the 7th of March, we were remembering that a couple of days ago, the very same, because we were trying to reconstruct the whole thing, the very same morning of the 7th of March, there was a hearing in Congress, and Mr. Marco Rubio said, Venezuela is about to suffer a level of unprecedented suffering, exactly, as never any other country has gone through in this hemisphere, never ever. And then in the afternoon the blackout began. I mean, he announced it. It's not coincidence. My point is that these kind of sanctions, I'm not going to go into the details, they are here, the details of the banks and amounts and measures, and Obama began, and then Trump increased the intensity and the frequency of them. They are part of a strategy. I was told that in Washington, there is this framework of thinking that they say that there are two schools of thoughts. First, sanctions work, allow sanctions to work, just increase the level of sanctions, the intensity of them, and wait out, let them work. At the end, you're going to have, perhaps longer than you were expecting, but you're going to have the end result, the result you were expecting to have. And the other said, no, sanctions don't work. They take too long. The target is not carved in the exact way. The target is not precise, accurate. We are making suffering, provoking suffering to so many millions of people. We want to destroy that easy. Let's go for other measures. Measures meaning black ops, sabotage, paramilitaries in Colombia. The noise with Colombia is increasing, and it's been like so for the last 4 months. They are being accused in Venezuela, and now at the OAS General Assembly this weekend, in 2 or 3 days' time, it began today. They are going to make a feast on Venezuela, accusing Venezuela of, let me give you a list. They said that Venezuela is a nest for Hezbollah. And then it's interesting, this thing, because I begin with this because it's so stupid. They are called the minister. In Britain it's complicated because the minister is the deputy minister. The actual minister is the secretary, like here, and then what they call the minister is the deputy minister for Latin America. The British deputy minister for Latin America is called the minister for Latin America. Alan Duncan, he doesn't like us at all. But he was asked in Parliament if what was the evidence of Hezbollah in Venezuela, and he says we have none. I mean, the British intelligence services are working in Venezuela, of course, and they have known, he said so. That was the best chance for him to say, yes, Venezuela is part of the Hezbollah conspiracy, but he said, no, we have known. But my point is, they said Hezbollah, they say Iran, they say Russia, they say China, they say Cuba, they say FARC, even though FARC has signed a peace agreement with the Colombian government, which is, by the way, destroying the whole peace process, and the war in Colombia is beginning once again. It's really, really dramatic and terrible event, but the war in Colombia is rekindling, and the both parties are rearming and preparing for another wave of war, and they are trying to imply Venezuela in it. They are saying now that the ELN, which is the bigger guerrilla movement, has thousands of operatives or guerrilla troops in Venezuela, that 15,000 Venezuelans are now part of the ELN, that the ELN controls half of Venezuela, that the ELN is the rear guard of Venezuela is the rear guard of the ELN army, and even more, that the ELN is the last one, that the ELN is a paramilitary branch of the Venezuelan army. And even more, let me say, this is delicate, I'm going to go in this because it's very important. They are creating the narrative that Venezuela is such a danger that needs to be invaded for the protection of the whole hemisphere. So Colombia is saying that Venezuela is so dangerous because all the things I've said already, but then also said, they also said that Venezuela is training ELN operatives with manpads, they call rocket launchers, that they can shoot the planes down at the 25 feet high, and that's why the US stopped any American airplane or aircraft flying over Venezuelan space, because they said that we were going to shut it down. And more than that, if you go to 2017, there was a conversation hearing, and during the hearing in Congress between Mr. Pompeo when he was the director of the CIA and Mr. Rubio again, and they went into manpads, these rocket launchers, personal rocket launchers, and they said Venezuela is very dangerous because they have these rocket launchers and they can spill over all these rocket launchers in the region, and we need to stop them right now because they are the biggest threat in the region. And in Brazil, Eduardo Bolsonaro, the son of Mr. Bolsonaro, the president, who apparently is worse than his father, he went to the school, Superior School of War, and he delivered a speech there saying that Venezuela is the main threat in the continent because of the manpas again. And the Brazilian military needs to prepare for a war against Venezuela because of these kind of weapons. So some Brazilians, journalists in Switzerland, they live in Switzerland, they ask, are you preparing Gulf of Tonkin case when some planes are going to be shut down and you're going to blame Venezuela? I am telling everyone at the Security Council exactly that. Be careful, because they're preparing the case that any plane that gets shut down in the region is going to be because Venezuela trained ELN people with these kind of weapons, and we are the culprits, the one to blame, you see? So be careful, because we don't know when they have these kind of resources prepared. I mean, they are preparing this stage, and then at any time they can come up with this dynamic event, they call it, that it will provoke the moral indignation in Congress to allow Congress to vote for war in Venezuela, as they just did in Iran. I mean, they blew some ships there, and even the owner of the ship says that he didn't know how it happened, but they already knew, and they put some grave films that some Iranians were doing it, and they blame Iran. But the idea is they were looking for a case for war. And even though in Venezuela, the case for war is looking seemingly farther than it was 2 or 3 months ago, they are so desperate. People like Mr. Bolton are so desperate, they really want to have a war in Venezuela. And if they don't go directly with American boots on the ground, they will go by proxy war with people like, countries like Colombia, which are willing to go to war because they are already at war. My point is, the war with Venezuela would be an extension of the war within Colombia. And if you talk to these ultra far extremist right wing, I mean, these people are so far out. If you talk to this, you listen, I don't talk to them, but I listen to them attentively every day. And their speech goes like this, their ideas, that the war in Colombia is not against Colombians, it's against communism. And communism in Colombia will survive as long as Venezuela and Venezuelan communists are there. And you need to go to the root of the problem. You need to unroot these Venezuelan communists to get rid of Colombian communists. It's an ideological war in the whole continent. This is the troika of tyranny, you see. Nicaragua, Cuba, and Venezuela, you need to take them out in that precise order, Venezuela, Nicaragua, and then Cuba. So it's an ideological war. It's a project beyond any. It's complicated because how can you deal with people like that? How can you talk to people like that? How can you negotiate or have any kind of agreement? And this Mr. Bolton and Mr. Pompeo are pushing for war. And I've been in government before, and let me just say this, perhaps it's an indiscretion, but one of the roles of ministers and high senior officials is to pay for the mistakes of your boss, okay? So Mr. Trump has just to blame Bolton and Pompeo for what happened in Venezuela, but he was the one who was pushing for it, you see? The ones who pushed to regime change in Venezuela was Trump. The one who first offered war or all the options on the table in Venezuela was Trump. And he chose Bolton because Bolton wanted to do it. And he fired McMaster as the other ones because they didn't want to do it. So my point is that Mr. Trump is the dangerous one. If we believe that changing Bolton and putting someone else, Mr. Trump is going to change his mind, we are deluding ourselves. Sanctions, or technically we call them at the UN, unilateral coercive measures are illegal. Sanctions are criminal. Sanctions violate human rights, and because they punish collectively the whole Venezuelan population. They don't discriminate between Chavistas or opposition people. Everybody is suffering there. People with diabetes, they need their insulin and they are not getting it, and sanctions don't mind who you support to or who you are against to. My point is that right now in this kind of war we are under, because sanctions are part of this spectrum, I am telling you, it's a fluid situation. Some people and countries, entire countries, are pushing towards war because they are desperate. They were defeated the 23rd of February, they were defeated the 30th of April, and every time, remember this, the 21st of February, with the Colombian border incident, when they tried to push violence into Venezuelan territory, Mr. Guaido asked directly to Mike Pence and the rest, please use force. And they were the ones who said, no, not yet. And then after the 30th of April, the failed coup d'etat, he went again saying, please use force. And now even Abrams yesterday said, the ones who decide the use of force is Trump, not Guaido. But what I mean is that these Venezuelan lackeys, they are asking for war for a long time ago. It's not that they are still thinking. The ones who are thinking properly and deciding when are the leaders in Washington, the real bosses of the whole thing. So we are in a very dangerous situation. We are in the middle of the struggle. I am proud, as you said, of our people who under so much suffering are still holding on. But I mean, we are in a situation as we had never been in more than 100 years, literally. Literally, never. Even, I studied even the Venezuelan society during the Second World War, when we had a lot of shortages because of the war, precisely. But we are not at war. But the Venezuelans suffer there. Not even there, we are under such a stressful situation as now. So my point is that this struggle needs to be won with diplomacy, the four fronts that you said. Diplomacy, economic changes and fighting sanctions, being agile and flexible enough to avoid or try at least to reduce, alleviate should be the right word, alleviate the impact of sanctions in Venezuela, being creative in producing new ways of fulfilling our needs and the new kind of economy, being much more flexible. The economy we had 5 years ago, it doesn't work now. I mean, it's ridiculous. You said it yourself. It's a dollarization in practice, in the factual dollarization of the economy. And we need to open the ports. We need to be much more flexible with people trying to create their own conditions and their own economy and their own way to cope. Cope would be the right word here, with this situation. But we are in an emergency, and we need to react to that. The media is another thing. I mean, people believe that we are eating each other there, and it's not like that. We are suffering, but we are not even more. perhaps I read this yesterday, and I was doubting if I can use it properly, because there is a UNDP report on Latin America, and they said that there are 14 countries in Latin America with a worse economic performance than Venezuela right now. 14. But nobody speaks of them. Look at Honduras, what's going on right now. Look at Haiti. Look at Guatemala. Why they are migrating to the United States. Look at how they are being treated here at the border. I mean, my point is that the situation, I don't want to tell you that the situation is good at all. I mean, it's not even normal, or it's really, really nasty. But it's not the worst situation in the continent. And the media situation is portraying that R2P means in UN parlance, responsibility to protect. It's a kind of notion or doctrine that allows other powers to intervene in other countries if they are going to save the population of that particular country against the will of its own government, their own government. Cases like Somalia, or South Sudan, or Sudan, or they claim R2P in Syria. But my point is that they are saying we have the right to intervene for humanitarian reasons. They are trying to build an R2P case in Venezuela. That all this suffering they are provoking the suffering, but the causes are being ignored. They're saying it's Maduro's regime. We need to change Maduro. And that's what they keep saying. Change Maduro and things are going to improve. But that's what they say to the head of the intelligence services who deserted a month ago. The man is in Washington right now, we read yesterday, and the man now is being celebrated as a hero of democracy, hero of freedom, and the sanctions, personal sanctions against him have been lifted. And now the man is shown around as an example for Venezuelan officers and military personnel to follow that particular example. So you see how sanctions and these kind of manipulations are being built in order to provoke an implosion in Venezuela. The fourth, I said the economic, I said the media, and the diplomatic. And the fourth is the most important in the sense that the most dangerous. We need to work for peace. I mean, we need to avoid war. The anti-war movement here is very important. That's why I listened so attentively to your idea. I never heard that before, of the municipal or city decisions, what is called the resolutions. I thought that resolutions were just in the General Assembly. Resolutions, brilliant. Resolutions of city resolution, or city council, or city hall's resolution, pushing for exactly that, asking Congress to approve the use of force in Venezuela first, in case that they treat. Mr. Trump said yesterday that he doesn't need any approval from any Congress if he takes military action against any country. Even, in fact, I read, because I need to read about these things, there is a book called War Presidents, American War Presidents, but it's called War Presidents, and it's the study of all presidents who have started or been part of war in the United States, and few of them asked Congress. You see? Roosevelt, Second World War, but the rest they didn't mind. They went in and then Congress followed. My point is that this danger, people who believe that Congress is going to stop Trump from getting into a war, they are deluding themselves. But they need to work in that direction. They need to warn people that they are stumbling towards war, or even more, sleepwalking towards war. And all of you have been pushed toward a war that none of you want. And we, no, of course, we don't want that war either. But my point is, how can we work together to stop that war? But mind you, we are at war already, this kind of sanctions. And how can we stop them as well? Because they are driving us towards implosion and facilitating the R2P, the humanitarian intervention, which means a multinational force led by the United States or supported by the United States to invade Venezuela, and that would be a disaster for the next 5 generations. We need to stop that, and this is a very noble mission. Thank you very much. Thank you. It's very important, your argument, not only because you said it, because it's the one which has been repeated all over the place, that sanctions are not the ones to blame, but we are committing suicide, basically. I mean, we are so crazy that we are, killing our own people, and then the Americans are just helping us to stop killing ourselves. The first question is this one, logically speaking, then I'm going to go to facts. But logically speaking, the first question is that one. If we are committing suicide, why do you need sanctions for? And let us kill ourselves and that's it. I mean, let the flow go, and then with the end result we will achieve. When they are so stupid that they are destroying their own country, let them go. Don't take the space from someone which is digging his own grave. But no, the problem is that they are applying sanctions as never before. So they actually think that sanctions have an end result, and they are trying to implode the country. That's the first thing, logically speaking, nothing to do with it. But the second thing, let me begin by the end of the present situation. Right now, incredibly enough, there are no queues. You said that there are queues for a kilo of rice. There are no queues right now. I don't know whoever has been to Venezuela today. I'm talking about the last 6 months. There are no queues whatsoever. The markets are full. But the problem is that people cannot afford them. It's actually different than the situation you were describing. You were describing something that happens 2 years ago, and I'm not going to go to that. But right now, it's not anything of you said is not happening right now. The markets are full. You can find aspirin and the rest. The problem is that they are so expensive that normal people cannot afford them. And you know what some diplomats tell me here? But that's the normal situation everywhere in the world. So to blame Chavez, even though I may say that Chavez I am not Chavez admirer, but he's a human man with so many flaws, but you cannot blame Chavez for the queues. The queues during Chavez, there were no queues. Even, I can tell you, there were queues during Chavez. You know when? 2002, 2003, during the oil strike. 20% of our economy was evaporated by the strike, the oil strike. And there were queues. And then we came out of that situation, and then the situation improved so much that we were proud of showing Venezuela as a, extremely good example of social policies. We were lifting people out of poverty, millions of people as never before. But now we went down again. When? I can tell you, 2015, the oil price crashed down from 120 to 20. And that's when the queues began. There were 2 years of queue. Why? Because we tried, perhaps erroneously, but we tried to keep the very same policies, social support policies going without the oil to support it, you see? The oil prices and the currency, the reserves for that. And we subsidized everything, and the result was that all these products, including gasoline, subsidized, they were used as contraband to Colombia. So you could buy at 3 times the price in Colombia the very same Venezuelan products that we were trying to find in Venezuela, and you couldn't buy them. You had to queue. But the policies has changed because we were forced to, and now markets are supplied, but prices are so high that people cannot afford the products. My point is that we are changing, but it's not as to describe, and oil price is not the only thing. We also had this policy from Obama's on, and she said it properly. Venezuela was declared in the insurance world a war country. So everything going to Venezuela has 3 or 4 times the insurance premium, and the ships didn't want to go there, the companies didn't want to deal with us. If you listen, please listen to it. This is very important. I forgot these details. There are so many details in this conversation. But if you listen, even though it was a joke that these Russians played on Abrams 2 or 3 months ago, they were pretending to be Swiss bankers, and they were actually talking to him on the phone, saying, we got some Maduro's bank accounts with $50 million, and we got to give it to you. And he believed it. And he went on talking to them. But listen again to that conversation. It's not now as a joke, but as a historical document. And you will listen. Forget about the Russians. Listen to Abrams, the way he deals with all these companies in Europe and in India and in China, all over the world. He goes and says, stop dealing with Venezuela, stop sending products, stop lending money, take out the money. I mean, actually cut the country from the world, off. And that's war. My point is that we are now in a different phase of that war, which is not the one you were dealing with, that you were describing 2 years ago. Now, believe me, well, you have family there. Ask your family if they are queuing. There are no queues right now. But the situation is not better. Exactly, but I'm telling you why. And my point is that we need to deal with this situation in another way that we dealt in the past. But it's not term limits. Chavez just ruled for 2 terms. He died. I mean, you cannot blame the third term, 20 years, 18 years. That wasn't Chavez's fault. He just ruled 12 years. I mean, governed 12 years, elected by the people, by the way. I mean, if, as you said, maybe just another logical reasoning here. If people were queuing for a pound of rice during Chavez, why was he re-elected twice? So my point is that that wasn't the point. There was a point that that happened, but that was a couple of years ago. That's the answer. Let me begin by saying something I should have said at the beginning, which is let me show my gratitude to all these, like you and Code Pink and all these people who made this massive effort in Washington protecting the embassy and putting yourselves, your physical selves at risk there. And even I read yesterday or the day before that some of you, or the last four, are being threatened with $100,000 fine and 1 year of prison. And that shows their courage, and we need to say thank you. That's the first thing we need to say at the beginning. And yes, we need to say, to applaud that show of solidarity. Then second, are we stuck, are they stuck with Mr. Guaido? I think they are, in the sense that they have Mr. Falcón, they have many others, but this opposition is driven by forces outside the country, and basically in Washington. I saw them in action. And they always have this power, media power by the way, to do these demolition jobs to anyone else who doesn't toe their line. So Mr. Falcón was destroyed, even sanctioned. But anyone else who said something different to what the Americans, I mean Mr. Bolton and people in Washington, want them to say, they are demolished. So you could listen normally to people say, yes, we want intervention, we want an invasion, we want a multinational force. These are the people who are always pushing the media. But those who said, no, we don't agree with that, they are put it aside. So, and Mr. Guaido, they put him at the front, they failed, the man now is, rolling down the hill, but they don't have anyone else. So they are stuck with the man. So my observation, just by reading open sources, is the following. They have 3 options. First, some of them said we were betrayed by the Norway negotiations. We were pushing towards war. We don't want those negotiations. And even Colombia, the Colombian president and vice president said, useless conversations. We don't want any don't have anything to do with it. I don't want to. Even Mr. Bolton said the same. They were very upset because they felt betrayed. Even Mr. Roger Noriega, one influential man there, he used to be part of the neocon, well, still a neocon, and very influential there in Washington. He said, they betrayed us, we need to take over ourselves and go at the front and push an intervention, get rid of him. I mean, meaning Mr. Guaido. And these people that they used are the voice person or spokesperson. These are not Venezuelan representatives in Washington. They are U.S. representatives in Venezuela, Mr. Guaido and the rest, I'm sorry to say. And then other people say, well, proxy war. Get rid of any negotiation, get rid of dialogue, and go for direct action. And the last one, which I read, is the fourth one really, I read yesterday in the Financial Times in London. They said the US or Washington is disappointed with this fractious opposition. They are not reliable at all. So now they are accepting some kind of negotiations as long as they choose people they are, acceptable for them. So they are going to choose which part of the government is acceptable, and if the end negotiations is acceptable for them, they will allow them to carry on with the negotiation. We are right there in this moment. But they are all betting to sabotaging the negotiations. Say, you see, another round of negotiation, useless negotiation, we need to get rid of this man by any means necessary. That's why I think, I believe firmly that we're in a very dangerous situation. And all this second half of the year is going to be very, very dangerous for us. You will see this weekend in Colombia, all the proposals to attack Venezuela. Then you will see here in New York in September, they are going to attempt to get rid of us, I mean, to kick us out from the UN by challenging our credentials and putting to a vote at the General Assembly that Venezuela, the Venezuelan legitimate government is not us, but Guaidó. And if they achieve that, it will be an open season against Venezuela, because they can invade Venezuela because it's a rogue state. So we are working, my work here is to stop them from achieving that, so to beat them at the General Assembly in a massive vote for Venezuela. That's what I'm working for right now. But my experience is that even if they lose, they don't mind. Mr. Bolton doesn't respect the UN. Trump doesn't care about the UN. They use it and get rid of it as long as they don't need it. I mean, they don't mind using that ammunition. And for example, let me just tell you this example, 3 examples, short samples. First, El Salvador. El Salvador didn't have any candidacy or candidature to the Security Council. St. Vincent and Grenadines were the candidates for the last 5-10 years. We have an agreement in our group, GRULAC, Latin American and Caribbean group, that we have each country decided for one slot. Our slot was in 2014. Then our next time would be in 20 years' time, because there are 35 countries. So St. Vincent was waiting patiently for their slot this year. The day before the elections, El Salvador presented their candidacy, their candidature. Why? Because the Americans want to show St. Vincent that they don't like them there. You see? And they use El Salvador as nothing, and now El Salvador lost 181 votes against 6. But they don't care. The US don't care. They use El Salvador just to show other countries that they don't care. With the Palestinians, more or less the same thing. The General Assembly supports Palestine in their rights to have their own state, and they called for a vote, the US, and they lost. But they just wanted to show the world that they don't like people with Cuba, the blockade. Exactly, so they called for a vote, knowing that they were going to lose. They are going to call for a vote against us, surely, in September. So even if Mr. Maduro comes, President Maduro comes, they want to embarrass him there, calling for a vote, to stop him from speaking there. They're going to do it. So we need to work to stop that. But my point is, it's very dangerous, because if we make a false step, I mean, we make a mistake, they are setting out tramps, putting out tramps all over the place. If we step on those tramps, they are going to go for it. So be careful, because we need an anti-war movement. We really need it. That's my main message.